War in Afghanistan, 2001 to 2018, human rights abuses. Multiple accounts document human rights violations in Afghanistan. Taliban. The Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, IGRC, called the Taliban's terrorism against the Afghan civilian population a war crime. According to Amnesty International, the Taliban commit war crimes by targeting civilians, including killing teachers, abducting aid workers and burning school buildings. Amnesty International said that up to 756 civilians were killed in 2006 by bombs, mostly on roads or carried by suicide attackers belonging to the Taliban. NATO has alleged that the Taliban have used civilians as human shields. As an example, NATO pointed to the victims of NATO airstrikes in Farah province in May 2009, during which the Afghan government claims up to 150 civilians were killed. NATO stated it had evidence the Taliban forced civilians into buildings likely to be targeted by NATO aircraft involved in the battle. A spokesman for the ISAF commander said, "This was a deliberate plan by the Taliban to create a civilian casualty crisis. These were not human shields, these were human sacrifices. We have intelligence that points to this." According to the U.S. State Department, the Taliban committed human rights violations against women in Afghanistan. White phosphorus use. White phosphorus has been condemned by human rights organizations as cruel and inhumane because it causes severe burns. White phosphorus burns on the bodies of civilians wounded in clashes near Bagram were confirmed. The U.S. claims at least 44 instances in which militants have used white phosphorus in weapons or attacks. In May 2009, the U.S. confirmed that Western military forces in Afghanistan use white phosphorus to illuminate targets or as an incendiary to destroy bunkers and enemy equipment. U.S. forces used white phosphorus to screen a retreat in the Battle of Ganjkal when regular smoke munitions were not available. Human rights abuses against Afghan refugees. Human rights abuses against Afghan refugees and asylum seekers have been documented. This includes mistreatment of refugees who lived in Iran, Pakistan, Netherlands, Canada, Australia, US, Europe, and other NATO members countries. Afghan refugees in Iran, for example, were not allowed to attend public schools, faced with restrictions on property ownership, freedom of movement, and access to government services. Bullying and physical abuse accompany many Afghan children throughout their adolescence. Whether playing at recess or standing in line for bread at the Ninvi, they hear jeers like "Go back to your country," and "Dirty Afghan daily," denied participation in any form of elections, and legally restricted to take a handful of minimum-paid jobs, and frequent target of scapegoating. For the price of citizenship for their family members, Afghan children as young as 14 were recruited to fight in Iraq and Syria for a 6-month tour. Afghan refugees were regularly denied visa to travel between countries to visit their family members, faced long delays, usually a few years, in processing of their visa applications to visit family members for purposes such as weddings, gravely ill family member, burial ceremonies, and university graduation ceremonies, potentially violating rights including free movement, right to family life and the right to an effective remedy. Racism, low-wage jobs including below minimum wage jobs, lower than inflation rate salary increases, were commonly practiced in Europe and the Americas. Many Afghan refugees were not permitted to visit their family members for a decade or two. Studies have shown abnormally high mental health issues and suicide rates among Afghan refugees and their children living in the West.